So I want to talk a little bit about measuring what matters and the importance of a values-based culture. A lot of this presentation is about culture, and you've heard your keynote speakers up to this point have really talked about the cultural aspect. That somebody asked me today, what's the hardest part about pathways? I think the hardest part about pathways is culture. And it's bringing back all this good work to your institution and moving forward to that. So I'm going to spend time talking about that. I'm going to spend a little time talking about value propositions and really how you take all the good work we're doing now and take it back to the institution and result in meaningful change. So I think I know a lot of you here. For those that I haven't had a chance to visit yet, my name is Jesse Coraggio. I'm the president of EdPro's Consulting Group, which is a new venture over the last couple weeks, but I was previously with St. Petersburg College for the last 12 years. I had an opportunity to be in a chair just like you were during the AACC Pathways, the first set of institutes. I got to sit in the chair, and actually Michael Bastian, President Bastian, was my coach. So I got an opportunity, and yeah, he did a great job. He's a great coach and a great president. But I had the opportunity to have that experience working with him, and I'm glad the two of us are working together to help with the Pathways work. So I want to give you a little perspective. I'm going to give some examples of St. Petersburg College. I always give the caveat when I talk about St. Petersburg College. I think they did some great work, and I was glad to be a part of that work there. But the caveat I give, and I'm going to share some of the practices and how it relates to the work they did around culture. Keep in mind, each of your institutions are different. There's different nuances, different student populations, different perspectives that exist with your cultures that exist at your campuses. So keep that in mind. Anytime you hear about a great, shiny best practice, it may be very, very different at your institution. So don't ever feel like you're going to grab something exactly how it's done somewhere else and bring it to your institution. Take the time. I think it's good to talk about good ideas, things that have worked elsewhere, but realize that it has to fit within the context of your institution as you bring things forward. But St. Pete is one of 28 state colleges in Florida. A lot of experience with Pathways through work on the student service side. I think I've said to a few folks, we did Pathways before it was called Pathways. We were fortunate enough. We had Davis Jenkins was our Achieving the Dream data coach. It's great having him as a friend to kind of guide through the process. So it gave us a lot of insight into some of the work that had been going on. But to give you an idea of scope, we have about 45,000 students. No main campus, but there are seven main campuses total and about 12 learning sites. So it made some of the logistics interesting as you look at the institution, and a high percentage of part-time students, a high percentage of online students. So let's start by talking about what culture isn't. St. Pete College, we worked very hard and did a great job creating a great pathway, a great sequence of courses. We had industry certifications that were embedded inside them. We did really hard work on that. That's not culture. Doing all that work doesn't change the culture at your institution. We also did some really good work. See how well we can see that. This is the top page of a 90-page Visio document that details every aspect of onboarding at St. Petersburg College. Living, breathing document. Things change in the process. We have to update the Visio, but we keep track. In fact, the hardest part now is to remember to go back and make those changes to make sure it's up to date. This is not culture. Doing all this doesn't change the culture of your institution. So Dr. Van Wagner showed this slide earlier. I've learned that when you see things multiple times, when you go to a conference or an institute, it must be important. This is really important. Culture either works for you or against you. Okay, keep that in mind. There's always culture. It's not that there isn't culture. It either works for you or against you. The important thing is you have to bring people into what you want to accomplish. I'm a very big believer on values-based leadership and value propositions, and really explain to folks how important this is in making the case for change at your institution. So I'm going to give you the 6 easy steps. So crack the code. Here they are. You're going to have them. You guys are all going to be able to go back and change your cultures. There is no easy way. As I said from Institute 1, this is hard work. This is really roll up your sleeves hard work. And it's a huge paradigm shift in the way that we've always done things, and it's hard work to get accomplished. This is 6 things that we've come up with after hindsight. You know, we didn't walk into this 8 years ago and say, these are the 6 things we want to do. But we're looking back, hindsight, and saying, these are 6 things that make sense. If you want to change the culture, and I'm going to put this in the context of pathways, but if you want to change your culture institution, these are 6 steps to really think about. They're not necessarily in a sequential order, but 6 things to think about as you bring this information back to your institution. The first thing you want to do is start with a guiding principle. Why? What are we trying to accomplish? And what we're trying to accomplish isn't pathways. You know, this isn't, what are we trying to do at our institution? Oh, we want pathways, let's check the box and pathways is done. Why are we doing this? And we want to give me a guess why we're doing this? We're doing it for the students, right? You got to deal with why we're actually trying to accomplish this. Because the folks that aren't around the table, they're back here in institutions, aren't that excited about pathways for the most part, right? And the folks that are the folks that have kind of stuck their heads in the sand during the whole process, probably for multiple years, definitely aren't excited about pathways. But you need to get back to why this is important, why you're trying to accomplish this. This was a previous president of ours. I think some of you had the chance of meeting Tanja Williams at the last institute. Our current president, this was our previous president, Bill Law. And he came in, very first role as president, spent a couple days understanding the institution, and came up with these guiding principles that he developed with his leadership team. And one of them is the definition of student success is students finish what they start. I was talking to one of the teams earlier who said, we really want this to be about student success, and that's the focus. But by having that conversation, the first thing folks are going to say is, what's the definition of student success? And those curmudgeons that I mentioned with their heads in the sand, they're going to be the biggest ones to challenge you. How do you define that? So if you're going to go and take the student success perspective back to your institutions, take the time and define what your institution believes student success is. That's important. He said, if you don't teach, your job is to help students get to class in the best condition for learning. We've had conversations through some of the keynotes about how important it is that everybody at the college is focused on improving the lives of the students that are in the institution. Honestly, if you aren't, you wonder why you have a job at an educational institution if you can't connect with what you do every day to what the purpose is of being there. So this was a good focus to bring everybody at the institution into the ideas we're all working on the same common goal. And organically, a lot of cool things happened when everybody realized their job was to help students. One of the cool things that happened is we had our facilities folks across multiple campuses now. Again, we're a multi-campus institution, no main campus, who took it upon themselves to decide on the first week of classes they were going to get T-shirts that said, how can I help you? And they were going to spend their first week walking around the campus helping students. Facilities folks, maintenance, landscaping, they took it upon themselves. This is what having this kind of developing culture does for an institution. And then finally, access changes self-perception, degrees and certificates change lives. Access isn't enough. And you guys have probably heard Aspen's 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 colleges, where we ultimately get to the point of access, get actually completion agenda, and then beyond that, what's next? Are they going to be successful, whether they go into workforce or whether they transfer? But this is an important concept. So he came up with these guiding principles that we knew by heart and talked about at our institution. We weren't talking about pathways. We were talking about what are our principles and what do we want to be as an institution. So that's a great place to start. Every institution is going to have their own specific focus. Then a mission focus. And our mission focus really was centered around 13 values. And under Dr. Williams' leadership, we've got newer values. One of my last roles at the college was to create a new strategic impact plan for the institution. But I want to spend a little time talking about what was in place during this time period. It took the institution about 9 months to come up with a set of values that they all believed in. It wasn't senior leadership sitting around the table coming up with them. It wasn't a consultant coming in. It was literally the institution at all levels vetting and having discussions about what the values of the institution are. And that was a critical part for our development as an institution to understand what we're all about. These were things that were on the walls. I'll show you a picture in a second. And each value statement actually had a definition of what it meant. It wasn't good enough to say we're student-focused. It wasn't good enough to say culture of inquiry. It was important to say, what do we mean when we say that as an institution? Notice the wording. This was an IR team that actually came up with this description, but it doesn't sound very much like our typical IR team that sits in the dark room and crunches numbers. I can say that because that's how I came into the role at St. Petersburg College. but it's about open, honest dialogue about who we are, what we do, how we continue to improve student success. And then you put it up on the walls. You hold each other accountable. When something's not going the way it should be, folks point up and say, wait, isn't this what we said when we worked together? Isn't this what collaboration is about? You know, this is what we said. Didn't we all agree on that? Hold each other accountable at all levels of the institution. So mission focus is really important. And what comes with that, at least at our institution, was a very strong focus on transparency and collaboration. Culture is about building trust. How better to get at trust than to create transparency within our institutions? We did that. One of the ways I'll share here is actually regular updates to our board on a regular basis. We told them, and the board structure a little bit different in Florida, but it was important for them to know exactly how we were doing, what we were doing, when things were good, when things were bad. And at the end of the day, when things didn't go as well, you know, our board actually had our back because they understood what we were doing and why we were doing. We could actually have those courageous conversations with our board members because everything was out in the open. We would share enrollment status. We would share information on our cohorts. We would share success rates at the end of every term, constantly providing information back to our boards to let them know what we were doing, how we were doing, and why. This is my favorite example of transparency. This is financial transparency. We actually had built a business intelligence site that was specifically focused on financials. And from it, you could actually get the budget and expenditure information of every single cost center at a college, every single department, and rolled up all the way up to the president. And when we first talked about doing this level of transparency, fear. You know, especially senior administrators, just fear. Wait, you're going to tell everybody how much money I have, how much money I spend, where I spend my money? And we were, and this is everybody at the entire institution who has an ID. This was your landscaping folks who could go in and see how much their department had or how much another department had. And to be honest, we turned it on and nothing happened. You know, the good news is people began to trust each other, they began to work together, and we literally have conversations where people would call up my department and say, hey, we're towards the end of the year, we're trying to get some funding to do this project. I see you have a little money left. Would you mind if we use some of that to accomplish something? And all of a sudden, people were using this data to work together and collaborate, where before everybody was so concerned about, gee, I only have this little bit of money, I'm not going to tell anybody I have, or certainly not going to tell them I have any money left, right? It changed the dynamic of the conversation because the data was out on the table where everybody could see it. All right, create a unified student experience. So the student experience in this realm could really be about what we're doing together with Pathways and Guided Pathways. At St. Pete, their focus started out on the student service side and was really about a collection of SESI high-impact practices that they weaved together to call the college experience. And it was really about the fact that it was charged to our campus provost. We had so many campuses, but they were charged to work together and make a similar experience. You know, if you go to a Target in one area and you go to a Target in another area, you have the same expectations and the same experience. The challenge for the campus provost were to say, we should have the same experience at St. Petersburg College. If I go to different campuses, different places, my interaction should be the same. So they built this model and focused on changing the culture around these 5 dynamics for how the students processed. So learning plans became a big thing. Every student had to have a learning plan, and we worked through that process. Early alerts, which I could do a whole different presentation on early alerts. Love to talk about that at some point. If you guys are interested, let me know. But had a lot of conversation, and I'll actually show at the end of this presentation some of the pieces we did, how that evolved. Out-of-classroom support became a cultural change at the institution. It was decided it no longer could be a punitive thing that we mandate for certain students that are doing well, but we actually change the culture and say, out-of-classroom support is for everyone. The expectation is everybody should do it. And we had dramatic increases in our success rates as well as a lot of our at-risk populations when we changed that model and made it not a scary place. We actually made them open collaborative spaces. We allowed food into our libraries. We got rid of tens of thousands of volumes of books to make space where folks could collaborate and work together. We had faculty members come and spend their office hours in these collaborative environments and have students come talk to faculty members. Students loved it. And faculty loved it too, because who wants to sit in their office for an hour and a half every day and not have a single person come to the door? And students don't like to come to a faculty member's office because they don't want to bother the faculty member, right? I'm not going to bother them. That's their office time, not realizing that time's for them. So changing the culture allowed doing that. A new student orientation, we created a Smart Start model that was actually the first 4 weeks of class. It was a non-credit course, but it was taught by our advisors, who then got experience what it was like to be in a classroom. And it was to teach them about St. Petersburg College and how to interact with these different things. And then we combined our career focus, where we changed our advising roles to career and academic advisors. So they did both. And they actually were certified as career development facilitators, a national 120-hour certification that allowed them to have the tough conversations about what do you want to be when you grow up. So you can come up with what your unified experience is for your students, but it's something to rally around and build a model around what you want to accomplish and what services you're going to provide students. And then you make it very apparent. We had, on the front of our elevators, we had pieces of the college experience. We made it very apparent everywhere we went. And I'll make sure you guys will get a copy of this, but you can actually see a video of a student actually walking through what the college experience looked like so students could learn about it. And then you want to make sure you're measuring what you're doing. So we thought those 5 things were really important for students, and Ceci had given some verification, but what we wanted to make sure is they were actually lead measures that led to the outcomes that we were looking for in terms of retention, progression, and completion. So you got to measure what's important to you. You have to make sure you're looking at the data, and are we accomplishing what we hope to accomplish? So we did see those improvements when it came to student orientation, improvement of those that participated in our career and academic advising, improvements in terms of those that had a learning plan versus those that didn't. And then most importantly was the out-of-classroom support, where we had our biggest gain. And you'll see at the bottom, no visits at 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to plus, huge gains. This was really interesting for me as I sat in my IR role, because when the head of the libraries came to me, I said, this may go in the other direction. Like, wouldn't you logically assume if somebody has to keep going to visit tutors that they're generally not going to do as well as someone who feels like they don't have to? Seems like a logical assumption. Not true. This actually completely against that, because the folks that were coming were doing what to the institution? They were engaging. It wasn't just about them from car to class to car. You guys have all heard of that, right? These were students who were spending time before class, spending time after class, and regularly engaging. And the ones that spent the most time had the highest ABC course success rate, because they were engaged in what they were doing. They were getting help, they were getting resources, and it was a bigger engagement to them than just strictly being there for the sake of the class. Number 4, make data available to everyone. So this ties into the transparency, but everybody's got to see the information. You can't have a small group, a small leadership group, or a small committee who are the only folks looking at the data. You got to figure out how to push it out to the institution. Let them see the data. Not just the data you want them to see, all the data that's available, the good data, the bad data, the ugly data. They have to see it and interact it and feel ownership over it. We used to say at St. Pete, and the IR perspectives was teach them how to fish. So we actually began to build tools and dashboards that were designed to give folks access to information when they needed it. We weren't just taking a static report with the information we wanted to share and saying, here's the report. We were actually focusing on tools that let them dig into the data. We were taking advantage of all the skills of our faculty to give them data sets to go in and look and start to analyze the information and gain insights from what was going on. It wasn't the capacity to have a few people in an IR institution. It was really the philosophy that everybody at the institution was going to be an IR expert and kind of understand data. And there's a lot of fears that go along with that. There's fears in the IR staff to say, wait a minute, I'm going to let everybody see the data. What if they misinterpret the data? What then? Well, it really changes the dynamics in the role, and especially from an IR perspective, now you become a consultant. Now your job is to go out and work with people to help them understand the information. But data belongs to everybody. Everybody owns the data. That's the model, not that a select few own the data that they want to share at that given time. So this was a Pulse BI. It was a good tool. I'll show some of the dashboards here in a second. But we ended up having about 700 users that were regularly going there using this tool. And it was a tool that allowed folks to go in and ask questions and use queries to pull information. It wasn't static reports. We can look at a few of those. So we had focus in enrollment. We had focus in student success. We got more advanced as time went on to really looking at student behaviors. So we were looking at those things around the college experience and saying, if the student has a learning plan, do I get the better outcome at the end of the day? If a student has participated through early alerts, do we see that outcome? If they do career and academic advising multiple times, if they're out learning support, we were really in a position where we'd be able to connect that information together and get that kind of results out. So let's talk a little bit about data, my favorite thing. So key performance indicators are really critical. You want to start thinking about what, as a group, is important for you to measure. Now, there's some you've been given through the process of the Institute, and these are a select few, but your typical persistent information, those that get 6 credits, 12 credits, college-level math, good indicators. There's a few more that CCRC has done a really good job of kind of identifying through the AACC work. Certainly good metrics to look like, to focus on, but your institution may decide there's other things that you want to focus on. But you want to make sure as you're looking at this data, you're disaggregating the data. You may also want to start disaggregating, if you're not, the regular outcome data that you have at your institution. Ultimately, you want to get to a place where you have lead metrics. It doesn't make sense to wait till the end of the semester to figure out if things are going well or not. I've talked to a few of the groups. There's a cost for waiting. If we're all waiting to get this built perfectly so everything's wonderful, we just hurt a whole bunch of students because we didn't start getting things in place that made sense to help them. So there is a cost to waiting and trying to get everything perfect. One, we're never going to get it perfect. And two, this is evolving work, so you're going to put some things out there that you're going to improve on, and you're going to have the next iteration, the next iteration. I like that kind of concept, the fail forward. I think it's a good idea. Fail forward, be changing, doing things. But look at the data and try to understand what are those metrics that are important to your institution that you believe are connected with the outcomes that you want, and start monitoring them on a regular basis and sharing the data. That's the only way you know what people need to focus on to make those changes, and then disaggregate the data so you can actually see who it's impacting. We had a lot of conversations here about the equity piece. We've got to understand what's the impact of the data in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it. Student enrollment patterns. So pathway is a path. It's from one point to another point, and within that, we need to start breaking down the data, understand how students are progressing. We need to understand what the pipeline looks like. We need to understand, like through the loss momentum framework, where are those barriers that are going along the path. The only way we can do that is to start to subset the data. And if you haven't done this, I strongly encourage to work with your data teams to do. Start thinking about the data in 0 to 25% of the program, 26 to 50% of the program, and beyond, into these quarterly breakdowns of the data, these quartiles, because you're going to see some interesting data that's going to become apparent that you didn't realize that was there. You're really taking the perspective of the student as the student's moving through, and you get a better understanding of how they're progressing through their programs. And also, when you get to the point of messaging and communication, we talk about those behavioral nudging. They're different based on where the student is. The one-size messaging doesn't work. And you guys have probably all had your challenges at your institutions where you don't get phone calls returned, you don't get emails responded to. We thought at St. Pete we were cute with texting, same thing. What makes the changes is when it's timely, personalized, and relevant. If the student thinks you're talking to them personally, they're much more likely to respond and interact with your teams. So you need to figure out where they are, where they are in credit hours, and change your messaging so it really is not generic stuff, because after a while they'll start to ignore everything if you're just giving them global messages, and start to think about how to customize the messaging to help them along, especially on those areas that are barriers, and then look for accelerators. What are the things that are helping students? And then you want to make data. We talked about data available for everyone. I used the term earlier with a couple of the groups. You want to have courageous conversations. You need to be out there and talk about the data. You don't want to just put it out there and make a standardized college statement on what it means. You want to talk to folks, let them have a chance to look through it, explore it, understand it, and talk through what it means to them. So that's a key piece of the cultural that builds the trust, that builds the relationships. All right, so now I'm going to be real personalized with all of you guys. One of my pet peeves is data-driven, and I'm a data guy. I really hate that terminology, and everybody thinks that's the up-and-coming thing, right? Everything's data-driven, industry's data-driven. I can't stand it. I believe in data-informed. At the end of the day, data doesn't drive us what we do. It should inform us. We're all professionals, right? We all have many, many years of experience, I imagine, are in this room. The data is a tool, and the data is a tool to help you, but the data doesn't do your job for you. The data helps inform us on what we're doing. Sometimes our belief systems are going to be substantiated by the data. If we believe that this is happening with this group of students, we really need the data to help validate that that's what our belief is. Sometimes we're wrong. And sometimes the data is going to give us a different picture of what our perceptions are. That's real change. If you can have a professional at your institution look at data that's different from what their belief system is, that they trust and have confidence in, that's going to change their behaviors. So it's really important that we respect data, that we use data, but it's to inform what we do and help guide us along. The other pet peeve sometimes I have with data is about context. Because data by itself isn't really useful. What's useful is information, right? And how do we get information unless we have a context from data? So this is our interactive portion of the presentation. I hope you guys are feeling a little better now. You've got some calories in you and hopefully some caffeine. So I'm going to start with two tests that's going to talk to us about contextualization. Our very first one is red. So if you guys could just shout out when you see red, what do you think that means? A warning? Bad? Deficit? Come on. Emergency? Wow, those are very, very different things, right? We're all kind of all over the board on that word. What would help us kind of understand what we're talking about? Context. Now, tell me what that means. Stop. Wow, look at that. We all said the same thing at the same time. So you see what that did for us? So just having data, and again, my background's I'm a data person. I love to run reports. I'm a closet extrovert. I love to be in the back room. I love to be crunching numbers on a whiteboard in the dark. That's probably my preference if I had a choice versus presenting or being there. But the reality is you can get all kinds of data. If the data is going to be useful, it has to be information. And once it's information, it has to be the point where we can do something with it, and it's actionable, right? To get to that point, we have to have context, and we have to ask questions. And no data is perfect. Data is messy. Real data is messy. Don't let that slow down what you do. When you're with your teams and somebody gives a report and somebody goes, that data is not right. You're not including your dual enrollment students, therefore let's just discount it. That doesn't make sense. Take it for the value that it is. Continue to improve on it, but have context on what it means and how it can help you. Okay? You ready for the second test? Okay, now we're going to get to quantitative. So I'm kind of a mixed method, but mixed methods person, but I lean to quantitative data. So, all right, and hopefully you can see that. Okay, it's a 7. Okay, I want to show of hands. Is that a good number? All that believe it's a good number? Okay, all right. Okay, now we'll go the other side. Is that a bad number? Bad. Okay, all right. So we got some mixed opinions. I know it's a lucky number, at least that's what I've heard, but I don't know if it's good or bad. What are we missing? Context. So what's my scale? Is my scale 0 to 100, in which case 7 probably wouldn't be a good number, right? Or is my scale 1 to 7? And 7's the high end. 7 could be a very good number. So once again, context is really, really important that we understand when we're working with data. we have a clear understanding of what the data is representing. And honestly, we're not always going to know. Like sometimes we're going to have to dig and do a little understanding about the data before we work with it. So keep that in mind when we're looking at this information. The other thing is, you know, if you can improve the systems at your institution to get data, people become more confident with it when it's around, right? And I know our IR offices, imagine at many of your campuses, there's always that sense that the IR folks are understaffed and there's so much need, and as you go into this path of wanting more and more data, there's more lists. I mean, I remember the world where I used to have 100 items on my to-do list, you know, 100 requests that I've gotten, and certainly you figure out who gets the top request, like who gets the priority. Presidents, senior leadership, they're going to be first on the list, right? So if I'm a mid-level committee, you know, I'm not going to be the first, so it's probably going to take about 2 weeks for me to get what I want, right? So what typically happens is you have this, you know, sitting around the table, boy, if we had data, we could really help us make this decision. You send the report off to the IR office, you wait the 2 weeks, you get it back, 2 possible things happen, right? The first one is, whoa, I've been waiting on this so long, I can't wait, we finally have it. You look at the data, what's typically the first thing you do? Anytime you look at new data, you start to make some observations and you want more data, right? You're like, wow, I didn't know this rate was that low. I'm surprised, you know, I wonder if it's different for this group of students. So what do? You go back to IR, right? And then you have to wait how long? 2 weeks. So you've got to figure out how to process, how you can move data out, that you can make it more sharing, get the information out there. The other thing that typically happens, and unfortunately it happens more often than the first example, is when they finally get the information, they forgot why they asked for it, right? Because it was 2 weeks ago. So now what am I going to do with this that oh, we asked for this? Yeah. So somebody has had this on this list for 2 weeks, finally got into it, got it into the committee, and then the committee goes on, I don't even know why we asked for that, you know? And so data's important, but we've got to figure out how to move it, and we've got to figure out how to contextualize it. The other piece is you really want to empower your frontline staff. This isn't work that can be done in a vacuum. Any type of cultural work shouldn't be done in a vacuum, but especially the guided pathways work shouldn't be in a vacuum. You need to bring people around the table that are all levels of the institution. Because the worst possible thing to do is have a team come up with a great idea, and let's just say it is a great idea, hand it down to somebody on the front line and say, hey, I just changed your DOP, here you go. Do you think that's going to be implemented well? Do you think there's any ownership feeling behind that? No. So you need to bring those folks in early on. You need to bring them together. One of the things that we did at St. Petersburg College is we actually had what we called a Wednesday webinar. And we looked at data every Wednesday. Now, I'll have to give the caveat that Bill Law, who I showed you up there, he had originally was a vice president of institutional research at St. Petersburg College, younger in his career, and had gone on and been president at 3 other institutions before he came. So he had a little knowledge about data. But we focused on a book, and have you guys seen this book before? Okay, if you haven't, I definitely recommend it as a good read because it gives you some structure on some things you can do culturally to improve the things you're doing. One of them is how you share information. And he created this concept of these Wednesday webinars, and just when I was there a few weeks back, we're still doing that model for some different things at the institution. But you get a number of people on the call. I mean, we'd have about 250 people on the call every Wednesday. And the president would actually facilitate the calls. So if you had any question about how important this was in the institution, to have the president on the phone asking questions, you got a sense this was really important. And I mentioned we were multi-campus. I probably pushed something I shouldn't have pushed. Ooh. All right. So, while Brian's doing that, I'll continue. So what was important was everybody saw it, had the same conversation. It wasn't a time for us to problem solve. It was a half hour every Wednesday, and we shared data among the institution. And periodically, folks in the room, the senior leadership would ask questions about the data that then the teams focusing on the data would then next week come back. And the really interesting aspect was it wasn't your vice presidents that were reporting the data. It wasn't your associate vice presidents. It wasn't your directors. It was frontline staff who were reporting out the different elements of information that was being shared. What a great professional development opportunity. And they were actually from their specific campus.
and they were asked about the other campuses. So part of their job was not only to focus on their specific institution, but also figure out how I got a pulse of what's going on. Because when the president asked questions, they didn't ask presidents just about the Seminole campus. They said, you're showing me data by campus, what's going on in Clearwater? And it wasn't a good answer to say, I don't know. So they had to really understand and research the data. A lot of those individuals that participated in that process moved up through the organization over time because we were teaching them a skill set about data. We were teaching them a skill set about collaboration. We were teaching them a skill set about communicating to leadership. And one of them actually, from the original cohort, moved all the way up to a campus provost in just a few years. But it's those experiences that help build that. So make sure you're empowering your frontline staff, that you're bringing them forward and you're involving them in what you're doing. And that's a key component, but find ways to share information and include them in the process. And since we were a multi-campus institution, they would actually have watch parties. So the provost on the campus would get together with their staff and advising staff, and they would sit in a room and watch this while the rest of the institution is watching it. And then when the call was done, the half-hour call, and it always started on time, always ended on time, then they problem solved. Then they said, wow, I saw Clearwater, Campus Clearwater was here on that. What's going on? Tell me, and they would have conversations. But it was done every week. So these were lead metrics. These were live metrics then. This wasn't the stuff, let's look at who's here the next semester, who finished the term. In fact, our deans love to call that autopsy data. You ever heard that expression, autopsy data? What are you going to do with it at the end, right? We need to find metrics we can focus on now to make change at the institution. So that's real critical. I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way. I'll hold up the paper. But a couple of the things, the president showed their commitment to there, and I think that was valuable in that process. But what it added to it, one of the pictures I have that's up there is literally him in a plane taking the call. And that was one of the few times that we were a few minutes late because he was a president, so he still traveled all over the country, and we had to wait till they got above the 10,000-foot barrier before he could join us on the phone call. But it was that level of commitment. There's another picture, a slide there that's actually us in a van at Valencia College. We had a state meeting, and we had the half-hour webinar. We planned and got there early in the parking lot, and we sat in the van and did the call. But it was commitment. It was commitment to say, this is important, all these people are committed to this, and this is what we want to accomplish. So, again, I'm showing some examples of what St. Pete did, not to say you should do what St. Pete does, but to think about how you take some of these principles and begin to embed it in your work. So how are you communicating this information back out of your campus? How are you getting staff excited about what you're doing with pathways? When I felt like St. Pete had actually really crossed the threshold to having some success is when I had a student sit down next to me and tell me about pathways, assuming I had no idea what they were talking about. And said, hey, there's a great thing going on campus, and I go into my office, and the counselor's office, and they show me what courses I need to take, and I take them one by one, and I monitor what's on my pathway, and I have this auto-grad thing now, and I graduate automatically when all my stuff's done, and they were excited about the career and academic communities. So I also shared that with colleges early. So we didn't call it guided pathways. Our focus is what was meta majors, and that's another term I'm not very fond of. It's a good technical term, but I don't think it fits very well when you're having conversations with students. We called our meta majors career and academic communities, and ultimately that's how they contextualized the pathways work, because them it was about those career and academic communities. That was how they interacted with it. So that's where I felt like we really had some success. So the last one is number 6. And number 6 is developing the next generation. You can do great work over the next couple of years, but if you don't figure out a way to develop the next generation of staff in this work, it will disappear. And it'll be the earmark in each of your 10 years of saying, yeah, remember we did that great pathways work? Yeah, that was wonderful. And we had that couple of years, it was great. If you want this to last, and I really do believe pathways is a fundamental paradigm shift in how we do work. I honestly believe that. This isn't an initiative. This isn't a slight change. This isn't a new strategy. This is a fundamental paradigm shift in how we do work. I believe that by making these kinds of changes, it can be sustainable. But if you want it culturally to be sustainable, beyond your time at your institution, you've got to figure out how you develop the next level of staff and give them opportunities not only to be involved with this in terms of an implementation piece of it, but also to continue to develop. So there's a couple ways that that comes forward, one of which is training. And I get it, training's cumbersome, I get it, training's expensive, but if you really want to make differences, you've got to train folks. The worst possible thing, again, we talked about creating the best ever strategy related to pathways, handing it down to your advisors or your counselors and say, this is what you're going to do differently, and having them have no understanding what they're supposed to do. Or telling faculty, we want you to be much more engaged with students and have conversations about what the students' needs are and how we can help them and how we can facilitate them with student services if you don't provide training how to do it. And the faculty conversation we had, and again, I call them courageous conversations with those curmudgeon faculty members that we had. I think, I'm trying to remember, there was an acronym that was Cave Dweller that kind of fit. Have you heard that acronym? That's it, yes. Thank you very much. You have every one of those, probably have a few of those at your institutions that figure this is just another initiative of the week, and if I keep my head down, it'll go away, and then I'll go on to whatever the newest thing is. But when we have those kinds of conversations, one of the things that often comes up, and there's a lot of validity to it, is, you heard the comment before that Dr. Hooper had said, this isn't my job, but there's another piece of this, and it's, I don't know how to do that. I don't know. For student service folks, you guys are really comfortable going up to a student that's really in need and having a very difficult conversation. Faculty members, most faculty members, don't traditionally have those conversations on a regular basis, and it's sometimes because they just don't know. What do I say? If I really get into some territory that's really uncomfortable for me, how do I have that conversation with a student? How do I communicate that forward? And the only way we're going to get there is training. Training where they have opportunities, just like student service folks had opportunities to work together to learn their craft and their role. We're going to have to provide training to faculty to give them a chance to talk to other faculty and role play and have conversations and see what those conversations are like, to give them a much better level of comfort to engage in it. And I don't mean to be picking on faculty. I taught in the class for a while. But that's an example of training. And literally at St. Pete, we had hours and hours and hours of training. The two examples I have on the slide, in 2015, they had 33,000 staff hours of training. In 2016, it was 32,000 hours. Now, one of those, which a big component of it, was how do we bring career into the advising role? We redefined the role of an advisor. We actually upped their level in the organization, made them career and academic advisors, but we gave them the CDF training. If you Google CDF training, it's actually a national training to be a career development facilitator, and we did a train-the-train model, and each advisor got 120 hours of training. So we had about 110 people that each got 120 hours of training. That's hard. That's a commitment. If you're going to commit to training, there's an expense where they're not doing their normal role. There's space for that. There's resources. Somebody has to be kind of running that program. But it's a commitment. It's an important commitment. So it's just one example, but training is critical. Think about, I'm not just going to give folks new things to do. I'm not going to just change jobs, because there will be changes with all this work. I'm going to figure out how to support staff through transition, and I'm going to give them the kinds of things that they need in order to be successful. One of the great examples of that was we do leadership academies. We started leadership academies. Many of you probably have leadership academies, but we did two. We did a leadership SBC, which is folks rising up the institutions, all levels. We had faculty. In fact, the last cohort, half of the folks were faculty. But we had faculty, we had administrators, we even had staff assistants who were really believed were up and coming through the organizations, and there was a whole application process. But they did a 6-month work together where they met every Friday to work. And now, again, a commitment, because they were away from the regular jobs. And they worked through that process, and it culminated in a capstone project. Perfect, thank you. How about a round for Brian for getting us back up and running? it culminated in a project, and some of the definitions of the project is they actually had to sit in front of senior administrators, and they actually got rated, and they had to do I think the whole presentation was only like 5 minutes, and it was timed, and it had to start on time and end on time. The whole team had to be involved in it, and they had to produce this, what they call a high-impact brochure. Their target was to go out and find a problem at the institution, and they were all cross-discipline teams. So you had academic folks, you had student affairs folks, you had business service folks, you had IT folks, all made up on these teams, and they had to go out and find a problem, research what a problem was at the institution, and then they had to develop a plan to solve the problem. And then they had to go to the detail. They had to talk to stakeholders. They had to, surveys if they were doing surveys. They had to figure out how much it was going to cost to solve the problem. And they developed this brochure and do a presentation. And then they actually got ranked, and we picked a winner every year. But many of these ideas, and these were often ideas that they had no connection to it. So, one example was improving the Alumni Association. They discovered that was a problem at St. Pete, did work around that. Another one was changing the testing structure for online students. I mean, they were legitimate things that many of the people in the room had no connection to, but found it as an issue and worked with folks to solve the problem. So it was all about collaboration. They did a training that was associated with change management. And then we had a Delta Academy that was for mid-level managers, and that was all about change management, because there's so much to change management and understanding the dynamics of change and how people interact. But one of the very first projects that was implemented, and literally this was implemented like 6 months, I don't know how well you can read that, 6 months after their capstone project, was something called Spark, which was a communicator and became the next evolution of our early alert process. We had an outstanding early alert process that worked functionally fine. Our issue was philosophically, it just didn't work. Philosophically, it didn't fit what we were accomplishing, and there was confusion about what we were sending out, why we were sending out, where the issue. Students would go back and forth between an advisor and a faculty, and the advisor would say, the faculty member did the early alert, so I'm contacting you, and they would say, I don't know, nothing's wrong, everything's fine. And then the student would go back to the faculty member, and the faculty member, why did I bother to push the button if you're just sending the students back to me? So philosophically, there were issues. And what we ended up developing as a function of this group is this Spark tool that was embedded inside of our learning management system. So it was a separate database, but for a faculty member where they spent all their time wasn't in our SIS system, student information system, it was in the learning management system. And so they could go in the learning management system and actually see their roster and get information on their students. And that was the tool, but it allowed them to communicate directly from there to students and enabled to put notes that everybody could see. Advisors could go in there without going into the class. They could go in and find information. Other faculty that had the same students could find information from other faculty. So now it becomes more of a group effort. Other than, I have a student who's not showing up for my class, wouldn't it be interesting to know that that student's also not showing up for all the other classes? Or all of a sudden, students doing great, I'm in the middle of the semester and their test grades go down. What if I find out it's happening multiple places, not just in my classroom? Maybe it's not just my material, maybe there's a personal issue with the student. And now I can have an advisor come in and have that conversation. So a lot more powerful information. We also did a college readiness survey that students would take that was part of this process, that the results then would come up on the screen. So they could go in and actually see this information and understand, here's this student has kids at home. This student, it would give age information and demographic information, but also how well they felt about technology, how they felt about their own study skills, how confident they felt in different areas. And that information would all appear, as well as how they were doing in all their areas. So we had taken a process where the process worked, but philosophically it didn't fit in the institution, and this leadership team had come up with a different solution, looking at it a different way, that became very beneficial for how we interact with the system. So, what did we accomplish with that? We got a new tool that worked better in the system. We got teams of leaders from around the institution that worked on a problem and came up with a solution that ended up being used college-wide, and that those folks have an opportunity in professional development to be that next generation of leaders at the institution. All right, so there they are. So you guys have the secret sauce now to all take back to your institutions. So start with guiding principles. Make sure, to me, it's about the value proposition. The value proposition is in guided pathways. If you go back to your institution and say, here's what we need to accomplish, guided pathways, you're not going to get the support. The value proposition is we're going to improve lives, we're going to change student lives, and this is how we're going to do it. Mission focus, how many folks can recite the mission from their institution? I won't call you on it. All right, I like it because it's short, clean. I always, my litmus test for mission statements is, can it fit on the back of a business card? Everybody, not everybody can recite their mission, but everybody at your institution, at all levels of the institution, needs to understand how their role fits into the mission of the institution. So they don't have to memorize it. It's great if they do. They don't have to memorize it, but they all have to know what their role fits at all levels. And if you don't take anything away from this presentation but that's very, very important. And that's going to help you connect to your work. So make sure everybody feels connected and understand how they fit within the institution. Unified student experience, I gave you an example of what St. Pete did. You guys might be guided pathways, might be a good example, or it might be some elements around guided pathways, but come up with that unified experience. Have everybody in the room, academics, student services, business services, IT, everybody participating in whatever that experience it is, make it a high-level initiative at the institution, and gather support around it at all levels. The data piece is hard. I love technology, but technology doesn't solve problems. Okay? Technology may make us more efficient, but it doesn't solve problems. I've heard a couple of schools talking about CRMs and bringing those in. Build your processes first before you purchase the technology and implement the technology. Know what you're doing and how things are going on. Bring in the technology to make it more efficient. Don't wait and say, once we buy that, and I've been through that a couple times at St. Pete when I remember bringing the idea for the CRM forward a year before we had budget, just to make sure we used to have strategic planning workshops, and you could get in front of the college and tell them what you wanted to spend money on. If we had extra money, it would go into these projects. And literally the whole college would join electronically to these presentations. And I went a year before we had money. I knew we didn't have the money, and I said, this we have to do. But what that turned into is everybody said, well, CRM is going to solve everything. And people stopped working on problems and said, well, just wait. Once CRM comes, that'll be fixed. Well, it doesn't work that way, right? It works when you do the hard work, come up with the processes, and then take advantage of technology. So data is the same thing, kind of figuring that out. Empower your frontline staff. They are the leaders. They are the next generation. Make them involved, engaged what you're doing. Help them understand, get their input and perspective. They're the ones doing the work. If what you're proposing is not going to work, they're the first ones that know it's not going to work, and they're going to be able to tell you why, and they're also going to be able to connect you with how you can tweak it a little bit to make it work. So engage them in the front end. Don't do it on the back end. Engage them in the front end. Make them a part of what you want to accomplish. The other thing is students. We talk a lot about student perspective and the student focus. Make sure they're involved in these pieces. Don't assume you can build it and it's going to be fine for students without having students as part of the conversation. So figure out how to draw them into this as well. And anytime you build something, do me a favor and step outside of the institution, take the role of the student, and think about what the student's experiencing. Visualize the student's connectedness to whatever that is. I talked with one of the groups earlier, and we were talking about the prospect card up till the time there's communications from the institution. Don't talk about how stuff moves from department to department. Think about how it impacts the student and what's happening to the student. Okay, that's the only way you're going to make these systematic guided pathways change, because guided pathways is all about the student experience through the system. We're building a seamless experience for them, but unless we think about how they're experiencing it, it's not going to make a difference. All right. Happy to answer any questions. Don't all ask questions at once. I covered everything, and that was it. So as soon as you guys had the secret sauce, you're like, I don't have any questions, because now
well, we're a little over on time. So does anybody have any pressing questions?
All
All right. I don't know about you, but anytime I present, I fear that the presentation, it's going to go blank, and then my presentation won't be up there. So, I mean, just a tremendous job through the technology. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right, so we're off to college team strategy session number 3. Again, want to point out the yellow sheet, and please note that there are some changes for a couple of teams. All right, head your way.